Hello everyone. I've offered quite a few facts, views, and opinions about Scientology over the past almost 2 years, and I've been very happy to see the positive effects this has created with so many people on my channel. My efforts have been an attempt to be a kind of whistleblower to the abuses and damage that Scientology causes to anyone it comes in contact with. While it wasn't my original goal to do this, my channel also has been a sort of documentary of my own recovery from the cult and the progress I've made in reintegrating into the real world through learning and using critical thinking skills. But I'm not the only one who's experienced this sort of thing, and I thought it would be a very good idea to talk to some other people who've also come out of destructive cults and get their stories. I mean, my own story is interesting enough, but I think if anyone wants to do any real critical thinking on a subject, they have to get more than one person's point of view. When I was in Scientology's C organization, my path crossed with Robyn Capella a few times, and I always liked her. After I got out, I was very surprised and happy when she reached out to me through social media. She too had made it out of Scientology and was doing quite well, raising her daughter and succeeding in life beyond the cult. As we talked, it became obvious to me that she had a lot of unique and interesting experiences of her own worth telling, and she agreed to be interviewed. We covered her entire Scientology experience, from when she first got involved at 15 years old until she left it entirely 19 years later. That's a lot of ground to cover, so I've broken the interview down into smaller bits, which I'll be putting out over the next many weeks. Please forgive the slight audio distortions that occur from time to time. It wasn't clear when we were recording that these distortions were happening, and I've done the best I can to minimize them in editing. Here's part one.
Hi, this is Chris Shelton, and we are going to be doing an interview today with an ex-Scientologist, ex-Sea Org member, who has written a couple of articles and actually did an AMA on Reddit, but she did those anonymously. And she's actually only written one article for Mike Rinder's blog under her own name, but otherwise never really told her story, never really come out and said a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about today. So I thought it might be interesting to interview her, and she was readily agreeing to that. So we're going to dive in and get her life story and also find out a few things about the Office of Special Affairs and how things go behind closed doors in the Sea Org, going all the way back to the 90s when Los Angeles organization first went St. Hill size, and coming on up from there. So we should have some pretty interesting stuff here. This is Robyn Capella, and hi, Robyn.
Hi.
So let's start at the beginning.
Well, we moved to northern New Mexico, and my stepmother read, she got a hold of the book Dianetics, read that, and was really intrigued. She got my dad to read it. They went down to the Albuquerque org, which is 2 to 3 hours away, and they did a intro seminar, and they were sold, 100% sold. So much so that she joined staff. She really very much wanted to. She'd been looking at a lot of self-help stuff, and she really wanted to sort of be involved in something like that. They got me to start reading Dianetics. I was 15. And they tried to explain it to me, and they did kind of, a little, didn't make that too much sense to me, but I worked on it. And we moved down so that she could be on staff and so that we could be by the org so they could do services, yeah.
Okay. Did they have any, they obviously were not avid Mormons in terms of their Mormon attendance at church and whatnot, but did this conflict in any way with what they were thinking?
No, because, well, I really haven't talked to him too much about that and their sort of details. And, in Scientology, they always say you can be whatever you are and still be a Scientologist. You can be a Catholic, or you can be a Mormon, or you can be this, and that's sort of the line that you're fed.
Right.
And since they were not active at all, actually my it's a long story, but yeah, since they were not active at all in any church, it really wasn't anything for them. And
okay, so there wasn't a conflict of going into the Church of Scientology for this Dianetic stuff.
No, and this was back in 1990. Nobody had heard of Scientology, honestly. Nobody knew. Nobody I knew.
No. The horror of it was not quite broadly publicly known.
Yeah, it just wasn't, you know, it wasn't really known very well to be good or bad. So,
right. This was actually pre Time Magazine's article, The Cult of Greed. This was all before that.
This was just a little more than a year before that, yeah.
How did you get involved with it personally, and at what point did you start thinking that this was something that was good for you?
Well, they immediately wanted me to get involved, and they had me come in and talk to somebody. I wanted to be like an environmentalist. I was an animal rights activist. I, you know, was trying to be vegetarian. I was trying to recycle. I was trying to do all these things because I was really, really concerned about all the problems going on in the world. You know, I was concerned about homelessness and poor people and all sorts of stuff. And we were not a well-off family either. So I had a lot of social sort of causes on my mind, and I wasn't really thinking about self-help. But I went in, and I was extremely shy at the time. And I was put on or talked to about doing a communications course called Success Through Communications, which is a very basic intro course. And I did it, and it did help me. Yeah, it did help me kind of come out of my shell a bit. It didn't solve all of those problems, but enough that I could talk to people, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you do that personality test when you went in, or did they just go right after the communications course on you?
No, I did the personality test, and I remember it was completely, it was almost all points were low, actually. It was really, there were only a few points that were above the middle line. Yeah.
Okay, so it wasn't hard for them to find a ruin on you and tell you what was wrong with you and get you in a frame of mind where you needed some help.
Well, I was a 15-year-old, you know, and I was shy. I mean, of course it wasn't hard. You know?
I know exactly what you mean. That's exactly how I got
it.
it.
The easiest thing in the world. You have
Right.
a teenager sitting in front of you, they're going to have problems, especially if they're not one of the, you know, really big, outgoing, popular kids. So, yeah.
What was it about what they said that gave you the idea that what they were selling you was actually going to work? Did you just sort of take it on faith, or was there something they said that when you went, oh my God, I really, really need this?
No, it wasn't really, I really need this. It was more, I remember very clearly the lady who talked to me, her position was the public executive secretary, which is the head of the, you know, how do you say it? Public, you know, new public section. And I remember her being very caring and, you know, just talking to me, and nobody had ever really just sat down and talked to me like that before, and about how, you know, they wanted to help me. And it was very alluring, because here's this person who's really listening to me, and I was just some dumb teenager, and she said she wanted to help me. So
something new and different for you.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd never done, you know, counseling. I'd never done, you know, anything of that sort. So
and it certainly wasn't like teachers at school were talking to you like this.
No, I mean, you know, I had good teachers and bad teachers, like everybody does, but teachers are busy. You know, they don't have time to help every kid, even if they like them and want to. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so you did the STCC and this communications course, and then you noticed a change.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
I remember actually going to an IES Reg event around that time. Yeah. There was a Ken Purek came into town. Yep. And I remember being very impressed. And I remember him talking about Interpol and all of these international things, you know, and all these good works that Scientology was doing around the world. And that, you know, really spoke to my social causes side, which was a huge thing for me. And so I remember, in fact, I remember wanting to give them a lot of money, and I didn't have anything. So, yeah. It was very effective on 15-year-old me. So.
Oh, by the way, how many people were at that event? How big was Albuquerque at that time? When you were on course, how many people were around?
Okay, it was really tiny. I remember there being probably about 5 people on staff who were kind of regularly there. I think I probably went in the evenings mostly.
5 people.
5 people. I remember, but there may have been a few more part-time people, but I remember like stably 5 people. And there would only be a few people in the course room at any given time, 2 to 5 maybe.
Did it ever cross your mind that time when you were in there doing those things? And there's no reason it had to. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, did it ever?
Did it ever cross your mind that if this stuff was so workable and so incredible and was having such amazing effects on the world, why there were so few people involved in it?
At that time, it really didn't. I think I was just too overwhelmed by everything going on around me. And, I remember having a thought about why do they charge? If it's so good and if all they want to do is help people, why do they charge money for it? I remember having that thought. But I also remember looking at it and saying, well, they do have to pay for the building. They do have to pay for the people to be here and the lights to be on. And so it kind of made sense to me. I had no idea how much they charged. We were only doing the, beginning stuff, which isn't very expensive. And then I did the Purif. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you did the purification rundown. And
then I did the Purif. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I had never done any drugs. Pretty much nothing to do there.
So at what point did the Sea Org recruiters show up?
It was probably right after I did my Purif. Yeah.
Okay. So pretty soon, it wasn't really, you weren't involved for a super long time.
Couple months.
Okay. So what happened with the Sea Org recruitment? How did that go exactly?
Yeah, there were 2 Sea Org recruiters that came in, and one of them was a girl who was my age. She was 15, 16 years old, and her name was Tori, if I'm remembering correct. She, and so, she kind of gravitated to the people her age and talked to people her age because that's what she knew, and I was her age. So we talked. She got me into an interview about the Sea Org, and I didn't know anything about it at all. I knew nothing. We spent 4 hours talking.
And how was that going? What was happening there?
I wasn't interested at all. Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't want to, go and do any work. I was, 15 and didn't, she showed me this reference called "Did You Help" by L. Ron Hubbard, and I read it, and that one's really heavily talks about how bad things are in the world and how Scientology is going to handle all those things and fix them all. And are you doing anything about it, or are you just going to be, sitting in the background twiddling your thumbs? And that pretty much just hit me where I stood, because I had been for months and months wanting to do something about helping the world. And so I said to myself, well, I'd better just jump in and do it.
Interesting.
Yep.
So during those 4 hours that they had been, briefing you about the Sea organization and whatnot, after they sort of gave you the initial idea of, I'm having done recruitment myself and having, been recruited myself lots of times when I was also at that, age, I'm imagining that they told you about, you're going to get your bridge for free, and that, it's a very dedicated group, and, you'd be amongst a lot of other really cool people, and, you'd have all these cool jobs and this sort of thing. And none of that was really doing it for you.
No, none of that did it for me. No, I do remember that she said there were a lot of people our age there. So it would be really fun because there were a lot of people our age, you see. And yeah.
And so she was trying to sell you on how it was going to be fun to be in the Sea Org.
Yes, definitely.
That's, knowing what we know now, that's hilarious.
Yeah. But there were a lot of people my age there.
Oh yeah, we were definitely having a lot of
younger.
fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so you joined for extremely social, altruistic reasons.
Basically, yeah. I was an idealist, I guess. Yeah.
That's actually a very important point, and one that I actually made just today in a Q&A video I posted about this exact thing, that people join the Sea Org not because they're narcissists, but because it's a fairly selfless thing to do, to give up, a lot of the things that people experience in life in order to go help other people. And it's an honest effort to do that.
Absolutely.
What did they tell you that you found out later was just total nonsense?
Well, I think some of the most important things were they said, they told me and my parents that I would have a guardian who I would be able to go to, that there was school. That every day everybody went to school who was under, who was young. They didn't give specifics, but, that we would go to school.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you'd study every single day in addition to going to school. So that would mean, so you weren't told you would work 12 hours, 16 hours a day. You were given the impression that it was much less than that. I wasn't told anything about the EPF, actually. Oh, they also told me that I would be able to come back and visit and have vacation time. And that was obviously not
right
the reality. Yeah.
And then also, when we were talking about this before, I still think this is hilarious. You were the fact that you were gonna get like what, $30 or $40 a week was.
That was. Oh, I was excited. I was. No, I had never really had an allowance. I never really had an allowance. I never had money. We never had money growing up, and so the idea of $30 a week to me was great. I was really excited about that. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
But I was 15. I had no idea about how life worked and about paying for things myself and things I would have to pay for myself. And I was told, the SEER would provide everything like medical care, all your personal hygiene stuff. I was told that, yeah, I would have all that provided for me. Yeah. Right. And all that's true.
So the altruistic reasons were very nice and certainly, in terms of the purpose of the activity, but it is interesting how all these other little 4 hours of supplemental lies painted a picture that was very unrealistic to what you actually arrived to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, while those might not have been reasons to join, if you had been told how it was actually going to go down,
right,
you probably wouldn't have arrived, even if they had shown you. Did you help?
Right, for sure. Yeah. If all of that other stuff, if I'd known that, the work hours were actually more like 16 hours a day, that you almost never got any time off and you had to fight for it and pretend that, or you had to have like a flap, which is like some problem with your family or a funeral to go to or something like that to have any chance of getting time off. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also a very, very important point, is the deception that's involved from the very get-go.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is kind of important is I was 15 years old and I was signing a lifetime contract, and I was never told that you couldn't have children, that you couldn't, have any sexual relations before marriage. You had to get married. That
they didn't go over any of that with you before you
none of that at all was discussed. Yep. Nope. And I was too young to be thinking about kids, but that's a decision, you shouldn't be making at that point in your life. So
then what? So let's talk about your EPF. So the Estates Project Force, the very first thing you do, it's like Sea Org boot camp.
Yep.
And because they are a paramilitary organization. So what happened when you arrived? You went to Los Angeles, is that right?
I did, yeah.
Okay, so this was 1990?
1990, yep.
Okay, so what happened? How did that go down? What did you arrive into? What did you see? And how did that go? Well,
I got into LA very late that night, whatever night it was that I arrived. It was in September. And I remember having to sit for hours while security decided whether I was okay to come in or not, outside. And I walked in and I was assigned to, the EPF at the time was living at the Anthony Building, which is about a half a mile from the main building area. Mm-hmm. And it was in a complete shambles at the time. I have no idea how it looks now, but inside it was, stairwells were literally falling apart, things like that. So we had to go there. EPF was actually really huge. There were probably about 70 people on it at the time. And quite a
70 people.
Huge. It was huge. And I would have to say at least half were probably people my age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was huge. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people would leave, so it was a lot of coming and going, and people were staying on the EPF for a very long time at that point. It's supposed to be pretty quick, like a few weeks, and people were staying on it for months.
Which is probably why there were, you know, so many people on it.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons, because people weren't graduating and leaving, and the person who was running it, I don't, you know, obviously don't know what was going on at the time, but in retrospect, I can tell there was some situation, and that person was removed and another person came in, and now I know it was a mission that came in to fix the EPF because it was a mess, and they got a lot of people through and graduated.
How young do you recall the youngest that you remember there at that time?
I think about 12.
Wow. Okay. So we're talking really minors here.
Really young, yeah.
Yeah, okay, and that's half of 70 people. I mean, you got 35 something minors running around.
Yeah.
None of them have real world experience. None of them have adult judgment or any real clue what they're getting into or what they're involved in. Your case is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay, so Sea Org recruitment has been this for a very long time. This is 1990. That sort of thing, you know, still going on. They're very, I think the prime personnel pool for Sea Org recruiters is the sons and daughters of existing Scientologists.
Absolutely. In fact, I have, if you wouldn't mind digressing, I have a short story about a 13-year-old friend of my my daughter's.
Yeah, oh, sure, go for it.
Yeah, this is when we were in San Francisco, and her mother was on staff, and my daughter was really concerned because she had gone down to LA, this friend of hers, and her mother didn't know that recruiters had taken her to Los Angeles. Yeah. Yep.
What?
She had tried to join the Sea Org before, went down, decided she didn't want it, and came back. And then some months later, the recruiters came back and they took her, and her mom didn't know that she had gone down. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
She was 13 years old.
13. She had maybe turned 14, but she was no older than that. Yes.
And this, I'm sorry, and you said that her mother was a staff member at San Francisco?
Yeah, she were on staff at San Francisco. Yep. Yep.
Which is one reason why they probably thought they could get away with that, because
Absolutely.
you know, that was a strong arm, a staff member.
Absolutely. And she was really concerned because my daughter was really concerned because she couldn't get a hold of her, and found out later that they'd taken her cell phone from her when she went down there. So she had no way to communicate. And she did come back, but it was a pretty bad situation. Yeah. I'm going to say that was probably 2008, right around there.
There you go. So, you know, does this sort of thing still go on?
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course it does. It's Scientology.
Yep. Of course.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get back to your EPF. So describe the living conditions first off, because you guys would go and sleep 8 hours a night in this place. What was that like?
It was really dirty. There were roaches everywhere. We actually named one Henry, you know, because we were trying to,
the roaches?
Well, we were trying to make light of the situation, us girls. And so, you know, we did what we could. We had, I think there were at least 18 bunks in one room, and which is, you know, no surprise to anybody who's been in these situations. You know, and the bunks were just old and the mattresses were awful. And I had a little bit of cash that my parents had sent me with that got stolen by another person who was on the EPF. So it was just it was not a good situation. And
wow.
At one point I got very sick. So I woke up one morning and I was extremely sick. I couldn't even move. And I remember my fellow EPFers shaking me and trying to wake me up and trying to get me up, and I just couldn't, you know, do anything. And everybody left. And sometime later, it was sometime in the afternoon, a lady came from she was the MLO, which is medical liaison officer, right, for the org that I was supposed to be going to. She came and checked on me, and we walked the half a mile back to the main building. I had no idea how I did it to this day because I could barely move, but she got me up.
Gets you out of bed. You have 104 temperature, and we
didn't even know at that time.
Yeah, you just felt horrible.
I was just, everything was a fog. I didn't, you know, really know what was going on even. And she walked me the half a mile back to the main building, took my temperature, saw that it was 104 degrees.
Right.
So all of this had been going on, and it had been a half a day since anybody had even checked on me. No food. I had no breakfast, no lunch, nothing. Everybody knew I was gone, but nobody bothered to even come and find out what was going on. 15-year-old girl, no problem. Yeah, so then I was put into isolation room with, a bunch of other sick people. And
oh yeah, we should actually comment on that real fast. In the Sea organization, when people get sick on the base and they are put into what's called isolation. In other words, they're regularly in a dorm room or in their couples room. But if you get sick, you get taken out of that space and you get put into what's called ISO, or isolation, with other sick people. And they might not have the same sickness you've got. You're just all in there. It's like a sick room. Yep. And this medical liaison officer person who may or may not, depending on who they stick on the post, have any medical training. They might not. Yeah. Or they're going to learn whatever they're going to learn by reading books or whatever, but they're not they don't have to have medical training to be on that post. Right. And their job is to come around and check your temperature, make sure that food is brought up there, and basically see to it that the people who are sick are giving each other Scientology assists, like touch assists, all day long, because that's what's supposed to get them better. And it's only if somebody is practically dead that they'll actually take them to a hospital. Yep. That was my experience with it. I'm sort of guessing that was your experience with it too.
It absolutely was, yeah. And I didn't get really checked on. There was a lady who came by and brought us food, and that was it.
Right. Actually, what I just described is actually what they consider the ideal scene.
Right.
For isolation. That's best case scenario.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay? So worst case or most usual case is you get thrown up in that room, and good luck on ever getting any food, because when you're in isolation, you're not supposed to come out and infect everybody else on the base. Yep. And you're supposed to be in there until your temperature goes down and 24 hours more have passed. So you'll be up there for days. While you ride out your temperature and ride out your illness. And they're not giving you aspirin, they're not giving you medicine, because they don't really like that.
No medication at all.
Yeah, so you're just up there sweating it out and, hoping to get some food if the MLO brings it around, and then just basically sleeping most of the time.
Yeah, there's no other entertainment. You aren't given anything to read. There's just nothing. You just have to fend for yourself, and it's pretty awful. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's not
exactly. No, exactly. And in fact, I remember a couple times when I went to ISO, we were actually discouraged quite heavily from reading any books, or you couldn't bring your laptop or music or any of that stuff. You were just supposed to basically suffer.
Ugh.
And do lots and lots of assists.
Yeah.
This laying on of hands that Scientologists do that, it's kind of ridiculous. So, all right. So that's a sort of a little explanation of isolation. I just wanted to throw that in there to give it some context as to where they put this 15-year-old girl with 104-degree temperature.
Yep.
Who's not even an official Sea Org member yet. And I'm quite positive that it didn't even occur to anybody to contact your parents back in Albuquerque.
Oh, of course not.
Let anybody else know what was going on. None of that was happening.
No, not at all. Not at all. It didn't occur to them to do anything other than take my temperature and put me in the room. That's really all that happened. No idea what was wrong with me. I just wanted to get out of there because it was even worse than the Anthony building, which is really saying something.
Wow.
The Anthony building was really, really bad.
Now, the EPF consists of 5 hours of study a day, and the rest of the day you're spent running around doing cleaning and chores around the base and that sort of thing. So what was it that, and the EPFers are divided up into units. So there's an in charge of a unit, and maybe 4 or 5 people under that person.
Right.
Is that about right?
Yeah, that's Sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah, and then those units every day are given a set of little projects to do, and they run around and do those projects, and they're supposed to get them completed, and then report back that they're done, and they get checked out. And that's sort of the physical work that they do most of the day, and then they spend 5 hours studying Hubbard's works.
Right.
And that's the EPF, and it usually takes a normal person who's just kind of doing it steady Eddie a couple weeks to get through this. But how did yours go?
I think it was about 4 or 5 weeks.
4 or 5 weeks?
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. I was a good student. That helped. So. Yeah.
Right. Plus, they had that mission come in, and they were sort of trying to.
Yeah, in the middle of everything, they had that happen. Yeah, yep. We had a when I first started the EPF, it was really ragtag because we were actually studying in a course room, I think over in one of the regular public course rooms, because they didn't have any supervisors. So it was kind of in the middle that we were brought, got a supervisor, and we were brought to just a course room that was just the EPFers. So it was a little.
Wow, that was a pretty
disorganized
situation they got you into there.
In 19, it was pretty bad. It was what the mission did actually made it a rather organized sort of thing, and yeah.
Okay, but you guys, do I remember this right? You guys your unit was you were in charge of a unit?
I became in charge of it. Yeah, I was put in charge of a unit. We at the time, the estates crew was really, well, I think they were always understaffed, but apparently they were really, really understaffed at that time, and they didn't have enough people to clean the cafeterias during the times when the EPFers were supposed to be studying, and they didn't have anybody to clean the pots and stuff like that. So what they did was they separated out my unit to have a completely different schedule than the rest of the EPF, so that we could do all that stuff. Yeah, and we did that for weeks because it was, it was filling a giant hole.
Right.
So, yeah, and it was a really unusual thing, and so we were kind of on our own. It was like 5 of us, completely different schedule, going to, doing study at a different time and everything.
Wow. And how were you treated as an in charge when you were running your unit doing this stuff?
I was yelled at a lot because the amount of work that we were expected to do was the work that 3 different units would do in the same time period. I'm not even kidding. Anybody who knew that there were 3, this was back when Lebanon Hall was actually a dining room. So we had to clean that, the main dining room. Incom had its own dining room, the computer management organization, whatever you want to call them. And there were kitchen duties that we needed to do. And we would never get through everything because even though we worked really hard and rushed as quick as we could, we just never, it was literally too much work. And so the guy who ran the kitchen would always come up and yell at me and be really mad. And I think occasionally he understood what was going on, but he was also getting pressured, and he didn't have any other solution than to have us 5 people do all the work. So it was a little crazy, and we were that was abandoned after I graduated. That
They figured out some other way to get those places cleaned up.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's there's actually a statement to be made there about all that yelling, because people wonder about the yelling and the screaming and stuff that goes on in the Sea Org, and yet there's this this sort of everybody's in the same boat and this sort of team sort of thing. So how does this all work?
Yeah.
And it's really it's a pressure cooker type of situation. People are under so much stress to get way too much done. There's too few people doing the work. And so and the targets are always, these insane targets where you have, like, for example, the story you give is just a perfect example. 5 or 6 EPFers who are not even full Sea Org members doing, work that 3 units are supposed to be doing.
Right.
Not getting it done fast enough, and so they're getting yelled at. Yeah. Right. And that's kind of a nice little microcosm of what life is like in the Sea Org everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And unusual solutions to solve problems.
That's right.
Things that
That's
actually
right.
go completely against policy, because it was completely against policy. It was against the EPF policy to do what they did with us, but that, that was the unusual solution they came up with. So
Exactly, which is also part and parcel of being in the Sea Org is unusual solutions, and they don't call it unusual solutions, they call it making it go right.
absolutely, absolutely, because I think there is a policy that talks about unusual solutions, so they can't call it that.
That's right. That's right. But they can't call it making it go right.
Yes, they absolutely can. Yeah.